Okay, hello, welcome to Hegel on the beach again. And I've come to Port Sunlight. So we're not on the beach, as you can see, but I've come to Port Sunlight. So if you look at all these gorgeous buildings and all these lovely people as well. So this is number 13, and we're up to master and slavery. And the reason why I'm here is because it links in very closely to what I was saying about master and slave last time. Okay, so the Lever brothers who built this place. Okay, so we had William Lever. He created Port Sunlight, and Unilever is named kind of after the Lever brothers. So he built up a soap business. So Lever established a reputation as a social reformer. He championed a shorter working day, savings plans, libraries, health benefits, and of course this amazing place here that he built. And it's just outside Liverpool. And he built it for the workers and for himself. The two of them were interrelated. So from 1888, this place comes from 1888, and it offered really, I mean, considering the 19th century, excellent living conditions. But the belief was that good housing would ensure a vigorous, strong, contented workforce, and the community, as you can see, was planned. If you look around, you can see there's like you may not be able to see, there's flower beds, and there's like a lovely gallery just down the road there. Um, but life in Port Sunlight meant very invasive regulations and implied compulsory participation in communal activities. So you had tied cottages, which meant that a worker, if you lost your job, would be almost certainly evicted. And workers' social lives were policed from head office, even though Lever said, well, let's not do it. It happened. And of course, some of Lever's employees really disliked his paternalism, however well intentioned, and the power that it gave his company. And even though it was kind of rarely exercised, it didn't need to be, because the workers would police themselves, which is exactly what slaves do in relation to our master-slave dialectic. So that's why I came here. um, but nevertheless, I mean, people just knew that it was an attack on their human rights and their workers' rights and so on. And although many people preferred to find their own accommodation, there were others, who were given an opportunity to live in this place. And here's what Lord Lever said as an observation. He said, the private habits of an employee have really nothing to do with Lever Brothers providing that man is a good workman. Let me just check to see if this is on. Yeah. At the same time, a good workman may have a wife of objectionable habits, or he may have objectionable habits himself, which makes it undesirable to have him in the Port Sunlight village. Okay, so it's quite straightforward, and that's why I wanted to use this lovely backdrop to illustrate this master-slave thing. So you don't have to be, even though it still is a tyrannical master, still masters don't have to actually go around and beat up the slaves, because the slaves had to take on board all of this master stuff. And I think what I wanted to go from this is to say that freedom is a social achievement. Freedom is social. And the last time I spoke about, if you remember the virtual death, we had the virtual death struggle between two desires or two self-consciousnesses. That's a hard, two self-consciousnesses, right? They want to attain what Hegel called self-certainty. They want to be certain that they are all the world. They've got to be sovereign, okay? I am the world, but they encounter this other who has exactly the same intention as they have. The other self-consciousness also wants to be all the world. And as we found out from previous chapters about self-consciousness, and how do these two self-consciousness get into the battle? So how does the master-slave thing get going? We touched upon a bit of it last time, and Kojève says this. So this is the Kojève argument, which I talked about last time. So Kojève said, without this fight to the death for pure prestige, remember that phrase, pure prestige, there would never have been human beings on Earth. So the fight for him, the reason why the fighting is for pure prestige. And he thinks that these two primitive, again, this long with self-consciousnesses, get involved in a struggle because they each desire each other's desire. Now, that is actually true. That is partly what we do in society. We desire other people's desire. But anyway, in the end, the slave will have to desire the master's desire. Otherwise, he'll lose his job. So if you're an employee of Lord Lever, you've got a beautiful house, even when you've got a beautiful house, it's still golden chains. They're still there. The chains are still there. and you lose your job. But you know, you can imagine for thousands of years that you lose your life. So it's a presupposition that you don't want to lose your life. You don't want to lose your job. Losing your job also essentially means losing your life, losing what your life means to you. And Kojève is also right that human love is a bit like, it is desiring another's desire. So Barry Manilow was right. You know I can't smile without you. He's right. Put the Barry Manilow album on, and you've got Kojève. So it's about desire or other people's desire. And it's true. So that's a feature of what it means to be human. But it doesn't explain the origin of this conflict. If the key to being fully human is desiring prestige or recognition, that doesn't explain how this type of person who does this, who desires another's desire, comes into existence. So in paragraph 187, Hegel says, they, the two self-consciousnesses, must engage in this struggle, for each must elevate its self-certainty of existing for itself to truth, both in the other and in itself. And it is solely by staking one's life that freedom is proven to be the essence. Namely, that as a result, the essence for self-consciousness is proven to be not being, not the immediate way of self-consciousness, not the immediate way self-consciousness emerges, not its being absorbed within the expanse of life, but rather it is that there is nothing present in itself which could not be a vanishing moment for it. That self-consciousness is only pure being for itself. As each risks his own life, each must likewise aim at the death of the other. So again, we talked about these primitive rituals as well last time, about people sticking their arms in ant nests and so on. So anyway, I want to be everything. I want to be all. Kojève says that this struggle is motivated by a human desire, a desire for prestige or the desire of another's desire. Okay. But the human, we talked about it last time about desire for a flag or a medal or something like that. But the human whose desires another desire hasn't yet emerged from that struggle. Desiring another desire is the outcome of the struggle. It's not the cause of the struggle. Yeah. So the future master and the future slave realize that if the fight goes on until one of them is killed, then there can't be any recognition. If I kill the other, then they can't say anything about me because they're dead. So what stops the fight and what creates the institution of recognition is that both master and slave realize that they can only do this by setting up a primitive form of recognition. So master, that which is master and slave, the first institution. Okay, so the master, probably he would kill the slave, but it's the slave who changes the course of the conflict. So he values life over everything else. He won't risk his life. And he holds up his hands and he says, look, no, I surrender, you won, take me in chains. So the institution of master and slave and this recognitive relationship it engenders is a result of the battle. It's a result. So and when I say recognitive relationship, as I said last time, it's recognition. I mean, it's not cool to be a slave because it's barely recognition, but it's recognition. And the master, he just sees the slave as a thing. But this thing, even in its most primitive state, this a bondsman as he calls it, he's a bondsman. It's the lowest of the low. It's the most primitive. It's the most despised form of recognition possible. But that is how recognition gets going. That's how this relation, that's why Kojève is wrong. So freedom, as I said, is an achievement. It's an it's an accident, really. It's an accident to nature. And then we happen to have been involved in this struggle. But it's brought about by struggle. Freedom, as I mentioned before, isn't mastery. Freedom isn't just the master, it's the opposite. Remember I said the master's stuck in his own reality. It isn't libertarianism. It's not the mastery of Trumpism, or it's not the mastery of Putin. These are static positions. At the end of his life, Marx was interviewed by an American journalist. He asked him, he said, he get a load of quick-fire questions. And one of them, it's reported, was, what is? And Marx replied, struggle. So on the left, we've got it's kind of this pseudo, it's popular now. It's as I'm making the video, it's a pseudo pacifist position that masquerades as peace, welfare, not warfare, And these type of generalities are, of course, something that we all want, unless you're a right-wing fruitcake or a dictator or something like that. But this type of political position, and I did promise you that it was going to be it'd be a political take on Hegel. I'll have to hold this before the wind blows it over. Okay, but this type of political position doesn't see that welfare only is possible because of struggle. Civil rights were not given to black Americans. The master didn't say, "Oh, see, I'm wrong. I get you now. I'll give it to you." They were fought for. Social and political rights were not handed down to British workers by people like Lord Lever here. He built the houses for them, but he didn't give them the rights. They had no rights. They could be kicked out the homes at any moment. They were fought for. So Putin and a bunch of world leaders aren't going to hand Ukrainians their freedom. It's got to be fought for. And that's why freedom is social. Freedom is reason. But unlike Kant, so Kant thought that freedom was simply the outcome of rationality. And I mean, you've got a point, hasn't it? You know, a bit like, you know, maybe Corbyn, maybe, look, you know, it's just the right thing to do. It's rational. Don't go and bomb on people. Don't do this. Follow the moral, you know, this is Corbyn, but Kant now, follow the moral law. But Hegel gets down and dirty and he explains the nasty origins and the inevitable origins of freedom, which is about struggle. And it's in the history of slavery. And more than that, it's in the emancipatory struggle of all forms of slaves through the work of the slave. So when we see leftists going on about peace conferences, let's just have a peace conference, because reason will sort this out. You pretty much know that these people are, maybe they don't know it themselves, Kantians, not very good ones, but you can see where they're coming from. And they think that you can have your rationality. You can come to rational decisions without the necessity of a struggle of the slave against the master. So it's an ahistorical and it's reactionary because it doesn't recognize, again, as I said, this centrality of struggle, which Marx did. And struggle for a better world, a world without masters. It's staking your life and accepting that even if you've lost the battle, it isn't the end of the story, but it's the beginning of the story. Hopefully we're not quite gone back to the beginning, but genuine mutuality has its origin in this history. And this is also the beginning of the struggle for the authority of human reason. Instead of a natural authority, the natural world's having authority, it's human authority. So that's why I see a lot of Hegel in Marx, right? I mean, it's not all there, but there's a lot of it, I think we can see where he came from. So Robert Pippin, who's a famous Hegel philosopher, said, most of the subsequent narrative after Master and Slave in this book, in Phenomenology, is all about failed attempts at the establishment of the right recognitive relation after the establishment of what had been taken to be satisfactory. So human history is a process of fighting to overcome the master-slave contradiction, and it will point us towards the next part of the book, where we'll look at how and why Stoicism, skepticism, and this great phrase, the unhappy consciousness, were ways of trying to understand and overcome unsuccessfully this master-slave contradiction. And one further quote from Pippin, he says, the bondsman submits to the master for the sake of his life. The master exercises his authority in the name of his indifference to mere life. But the slave's acknowledgement is worthless to the master, and the master withholds any real recognition for the bondsman, which means, yeah, okay, I'll give you the house. It's not real recognition. Each, in a general sense, takes back with one hand what is proffered by another, and must find a way of understanding their untenable and unstable situation. Hegel's unusual suggestion at this point begins quite a different way of understanding what is normally would be taken to be various possible philosophical and religious options. Hegel understands them, Stoicism, skepticism, and the unhappy consciousness, as a way of, in effect, compensating for and evading the situation just as described. Okay, so in 199, paragraph 199 of Phenomenology, Hegel says, as a universal form of the world spirit, it can only come on the scene, the world spirit, in a time of universal fear and servitude, which is, however, also a time of universal cultural maturation, which has raised culturally educative activity all the way up to the heights of thought. Now, so that's Pip. It's great. I think it's is understand that it's very it's one of the best readings I think of the Hegel. It's the best reading of this section as well of Master Slave. Because if you go back to Kozhev's Stalinist reading of Hegel, Jeff Love, who's another philosopher, I think, from Australia, he said in Alexander Kozhev and his philosophical Stalinism, he argues that Stalinism could be seen as a type of utopianism. Okay, now we think of utopianism, don't we, like a beautiful, like this. This is a kind of utopia for workers, but not like a gorgeous utopia in that sense. We don't think of terror as it, but and terror for terror's sake. But that's precisely, I think he makes a good argument for it. And it's counterintuitively this abandonment of individuality is central to Kozhev's reading of Hegel. So Kozhev implicitly argues that you must abandon your individuality and humanity. So for Kozhev, both human and history are effectively the same and are born only from the rejection of instinct and the natural system, the natural world as such. So history begins only with the rejection of instinct and of the world as a natural system. So that's Jeff Love. And the stuff he's done on Kozhev it's just brilliant reading. So there's no history without this rejecting of the natural world and the human instinct. So Kozhev, I mean, it's just bizarre, but in a way, if you read him like this, he's a bit like Plato. He's rejecting, or a Christian thinker, he's rejecting the body because the instinct for self-preservation is based on the fear of bodily death. So for Kozhev, freedom is freedom from nature, freedom from natural desire. And these desires are what bourgeois freedoms are all about as well. So for Kozhev, this type of bourgeois satisfaction is nothing more than the rejection of the possibility of being human. And while you're alive, get like a monk, you're subject to all the vulgar necessities of life itself. You remain a slave and a selfish self because you're still powered by these desires, these natural desires. So in the conflict between master and slave, there's no third person adjudicator. There's no way for a resolution to take place other than the resolution of history and the playing out of the master and slave dialectic to the end. Therefore, an institutional arrangement or a system is only possible at the end of the conflict when it's all resolved. And when master and slave, so the historical process concludes. Once this has reached its ultimate endpoint, once this built-in institutional conflict is terminated in either a sort of socialist society or Stalinism or a democratic liberal order, and the desire for recognition has been sort of satisfied on the surface, then how are conflicts to arise that arise from desire for recognition, how are they going to be resolved? So Jeff Love says, it's a rather lengthy quote, but it's brilliant. A nagging concern emerges here. If the universal and homogeneous state represents the final overcoming of individuality, why would there be any need for a juridical apparatus? Surely the abolition of individuality would bring with it the abolition of selfish desire, as in recognition. That is, the perennial source of conflict, of the temptation to place one's own over others. Nonetheless, the comprehensive teaching of the treatise makes no sense without another firm presupposition that the juridical signals the ultimate end of the political, of struggle, of history, individuality as such. Where the political finally ends, the juridical comes into its own as the authoritative ordering of action in the universal homogeneous state. Conflict has come to an end. The juridical system comes to a sort of surrogate instinct, a new or second nature to correct the error that conflict represents and to create the groundwork for a terminal condition in which individuality, understood as error, will be definitively overcome. Viewed in this light, individuality is a deviation to be suppressed via the juridical system and administrative state, and this suppression is essential to the universal and homogeneous state that thereby offers the most radical emancipation from the fear of death itself. For if one no longer seeks to preserve one's individuality, one is no longer afraid to die, and as Kozhev says elsewhere, only individuals die. Okay, so cheerful. I mean, Jeff Love's nuts. agreeing with that. He's pointing out that's where Kojèv's coming from, but it's like terribly depressing, isn't it? That and one of Kojèv's more extreme conclusions to this conflict is, and you can Google this and look it up. But if you look it up, he talks about suicide. Now, he never actually committed suicide himself. I think he died, but that's his way out. Because suicide frees us from nature, absolutely. I mean, this is ridiculous, of course, but it's logical from a Kojèvian point of view. And the other issue that Kojèv draws to our attention is the thing about this administrative state. So what does this administrative state, this post-master slave state, look like? And, there are maybe a few examples on offer, but I mean, China, almost the perfect example. Although China has plenty of slaves and quite a few masters as well. It's got more billionaires, I think, than anywhere else on the planet. And we come back again to this terrifying idea of the state as exemplified by this Leviathan of Hobbes. I'm going to have to bring a picture of it next time. So this is the Leviathan. The Leviathan state is this maybe what we describe as the Chinese state. Only this Leviathan state is now at a higher level after the abolition of, or the so-called abolition. We know it really hasn't happened, of master and slave in China. Okay, so that's Port Sunlight. These are some of the beautiful people of Port Sunlight, and I don't think there's any more Thai cottages left, but it's such a lovely day. I had to come here to do it at this time, and next time we're going to be doing Stoicism, skepticism, and maybe the unhappy consciousness, we'll see. And so it's the next part of the story. How is master slave going to be resolved? And it's like we're going to move on to the Romans. Okay, so we'll see you later. Okay, bye.